In 1966, Godzilla returns via another rewrite of a pre-existing script. Originally, King Kong was going to return to the big screen in a film where the giant ape battled Ebirah. However, Toho knew that Godzilla was a better match for the aquatic menace and rewrote the script to reflect that in Jun Fukuda's 1966 film, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, Jim.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham, and of course I am here with Chris, who again is doing the entire Godzilla franchise with me, and might be continuing to do some other franchises if he's in the loop for that.
Yeah, we will see what the future holds.
Yeah, because I know you said you were a fan of like Friday the 13th and stuff, and I am always down to talk about a very few franchises such as Godzilla, Halloween, Friday the 13th. I could talk your ear off about them all day.
Yeah, I grew up on those, so you know, I used to have, those are some of the first movies I collected, so I'd be game for that.
Absolutely, but that is down the road. Today we are talking about Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Ebirah, Horror of the Deep is a 1966 Japanese kaiju film directed by Jun Fukuda and produced and distributed by Toho. The film stars Akira Takarada, Kumi Mizuno, Akihiro Harada, and Aisi Amamoto, and features the fictional monsters Godzilla, Mothra, and Ebirah. It is the seventh film in the Godzilla franchise and features special effects by Sadamasa Arakawa under the supervision of Eiji Tsuburaya. Now, when I was little, I don't remember liking this movie, but upon rewatch, it is, to say the least, it's a fun film. I didn't think I was going to have as much fun with it. I was kind of dreading it when you brought it up a couple episodes ago, but I actually had fun on the rewatch with this one.
That's interesting because I'd have to say that I have a little bit of the opposite reaction. This was one of the ones I watched all the time as a kid, and rewatching it was definitely a little bit of a rough around the edges experience, and without the nostalgia, there was, you know, not to hate on it, but it definitely wasn't as easy of a rewatch as I thought it was going to be.
Oh yeah, it's not, you know, you're not rewatching King Kong vs. Godzilla or Mothra vs. Godzilla, but in its own little way, it's a fun watch. I mean, as a Godzilla fan, you're gonna get a kick out of it either way, because I mean, you're here for Godzilla, so of course you like the film no matter what.
Yeah, definitely. Do you are you interested in sharing the story of some of the behind the scenes of what this film started out as and the kind of interesting journey it took to become a Godzilla movie?
I do have a couple fun facts, and if I don't cover the fun facts that you have, you're more than welcome to spitball them in right after. But I was going to save them for later, but I can get right into fun facts if you want me to.
However we want to do it. If we want to just get done with this quick intro and then do the trailer and summary and then get into the full-blown discussion, that works for me.
All right, I'll go into a little backstory here. During its development, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep was intended to feature King Kong, but the character was replaced by Godzilla, and the film was released to theaters in Japan on December 17th, 1966, and was released directly to television in the United States in 1968 by Film Ventures International under the title Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. Okay, so by 1966, Toho had their sights set on bringing back King Kong, and their deal with RKO allowed them to use King Kong for 5 years, an agreement that would be over in 1967. The concept was first pitched by Shinichi Sekizawa on July 13, 1966. Unfortunately, the Kong vehicle was not to be. Rankin Bass, they were displeased that Toho was dead set on Jun Fukuda directing the live action, and Eiji Tsuburaya's protege, Sadamasa Arakawa, handling special effects. Rankin Bass was equally dead set on the creative team being Ishiro Honda and Eiji Tsuburaya. But when Toho refused to budge and was unable to compromise, Rankin Bass dropped out of the project, and Toho liked the script so much that they just decided to drop Godzilla in place of Kong and made it Godzilla, Ebirah, and Mothra, Big Duel in the South Seas for their New Year's blockbuster. And that's pretty much the story I got from it. I don't know if you dug a little deeper.
No, that's actually more deep than I'd ever dug. I only knew the surface level version, which was that, long story short, they weren't very pleased with what I understood was the script and the story, and weren't very pleased with that as a King Kong movie. I didn't know they took any umbrage with the creative team. And then so Toho kind of did a little bit of a search and replace and just dropped Godzilla into King Kong's place in the script, and then eventually developed King Kong Escapes as the King Kong movie that satisfied all of those involved. But I didn't know that there were questions raised on, we want Ishiro Honda as the director and things of that nature. So that's actually new for me to hear.
Yeah, and you think that, if Ishiro Honda would have directed this film, you wonder what it could have been. If it would have been a darker, more serious tone, or like what it would have been like with King Kong in it.
Yeah, indeed, because my line of thinking would have been that if it had been a King Kong movie, that it would have been directed by Ishiro Honda, and I guess my line of thought would be that that I don't know. It's interesting to think about, because I kind of thought that maybe it would have. Maybe I originally thought that it would have been a Jun Fukuda King Kong movie, and that I don't know. I was always a little confused about if it had stayed a King Kong movie, would it have been an Ishiro Honda directed King Kong movie, or would they have kept Jun Fukuda as the director? Because it seemed like they raised issues about Jun Fukuda being the director, and one of the ways they solved that was to get Ishiro Honda. All right, yeah. So it would have been interesting to see if, it seemed like they were insistent on Ishiro Honda directing it as a King Kong movie. So it's like, if this was a King Kong movie directed by Ishiro Honda with this script and concept, that maybe would have been really interesting. If it had stayed as Jun Fukuda as the director, but just King Kong in Godzilla's place, we probably would have gotten a movie more or less like this one. And the interesting thing is that this is because of that little sort of journey of putting Godzilla in a King Kong movie. This is the first Godzilla movie where it kind of feels, the whole movie feels kind of like off-brand Godzilla almost, like not in an insulting kind of way, but it's like this is one that's clearly got a different director, and just on a concept is very different from the kind of Godzilla movies we got before. So it ended up with a really unique movie.
For sure, I agree with you. And it's too bad we didn't get Ishiro Honda Kong movie, because I like the Kong franchise, and I think there's a lot he could have brought to it.
I agree, and here's a little bit of trivia that we start to talk about. As the franchise goes on, we'll start to be able to hypothesize about alternate timelines. But you mentioned how their rights to King Kong expired in 1967. Well, if this movie had been a King Kong movie instead, if we sort of split the difference, and instead of Godzilla versus the Sea Monster and then Son of Godzilla, if instead we had gotten, King Kong Escapes this year in place of this film, and maybe in that world, we get Destroy All Monsters a year sooner. Maybe instead of 1967 or 1968, maybe Destroy All Monsters comes in 1967. And the interesting thing about that is that King Kong was originally considered to be used in Destroy All Monsters, but Toho was getting nervous about exactly when their rights to him expired, and so opted to not have King Kong in Destroy All Monsters. But if things had just kind of shaken out a year sooner, we probably would have ended up with the Toho King Kong being in Destroy All Monsters, which just would have been a very, very cool thing to see.
100%. And then, I mean, like you said, you get King Kong Escapes, maybe Kong and Destroy All Monsters, and then maybe they sign another deal and then come back for King Kong versus Ebirah or some other crazy. They look at Mothra and see like she's really popular, and then Kong's doing well, so we get a Kong versus Mothra film. Or there's so many different crazy scenarios you could think of if this one film had to or ended up happening with Kong.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they had King Kong for 5 years, and they did 2 movies with him. They did King Kong versus Godzilla and King Kong Escapes, and it's like you would think with the way they could crank these movies out. You know, I know at one point they were going to do a direct sequel to King Kong versus Godzilla that was just going to be, you know, King Kong versus Godzilla 2. But, I mean, gosh, 5 years, you think that you easily could have gotten 3, 4, or maybe even 5 different Toho movies with King Kong in it. You know, they kind of really, really missed the boat on that one if you think about it.
Yeah, for sure. But it's something we'll never know now. I mean, you see America, they got the rights to Godzilla and they're pumping them out.
Exactly.
It's almost like another, not as often as the Showa era, but 2014, 2019 was 2021 and now 2023. Who knows if they're going to continue the rights for Godzilla? And I just think they missed a big opportunity here with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. But enough about what could have been. I suppose we've got a film on hand to talk about it.
Yeah, if we want to get back on track, I'll get right into the trailer of Ebirah Horror of the Deep, and then we'll give a plot synopsis, and then come back, and we got some fun facts on the film, some numbers for you, and we'll get into all that.
侵入していいって方はないの。
ちくしょう、アイデアで勝負しろだ。
エビラが見逃さないでしょ。私たちには悪魔の島です。
見ろ、いいか言ったぞ。一枚革命か。これを押せば島は跡形もなく吹っ飛ぶぞ。核爆発次元装置。
After Yada is lost at sea, his brother Ryota steals a yacht with his 2 friends and a bank robber. However, the crew runs afoul of Ebirah, a giant lobster-like creature, and washes ashore on Lechi Island. There, the Red Bamboo, a terrorist organization, manufactures heavy water for selling weapons of mass destruction and a yellow liquid that keeps Ebirah at bay, presumably controlling him. The Red Bamboo has enslaved natives from nearby Infant Island to create the yellow liquid, while the natives hope that Mothra will awaken in her winged adult form and rescue them. In their efforts to avoid capture, Ryota and his friends, aided by Dio, a native girl, come across Godzilla, who previously fought Ghidorah and is now sleeping within a cliffside cavern. The group devises a plan to defeat the Red Bamboo and escape the island. In the process, they awaken Godzilla using a makeshift lightning rod. Godzilla fights Ebirah, but the huge crustacean escapes. Godzilla is then attacked by a giant condor by the name of Ukundru and a squadron of Red Bamboo fighter jets. Using his atomic ray, Godzilla destroys the jets and kills the giant bird. The humans retrieve the missing Yada and free the enslaved natives as Godzilla begins to destroy the Red Bamboo's base of operations, smashing a tower that causes a countdown that will destroy the island in a nuclear explosion. Godzilla fights Ebirah and defeats it, ripping its claws off and forcing it to retreat into the sea. The natives await for Mothra to carry them off in a large net. However, when she gets to the island, Mothra is challenged by Godzilla due to a previous confrontation. Mothra manages to repel Godzilla and save her people and the human heroes. Godzilla also escapes just before the bomb detonates and destroys the island. Alright, as always I got some numbers for you. I could not find the budget for this film, but I did find the box office, which was 330 million yen. It sold 3.45 million tickets its initial release, and on a re-release it sold another 760,000 for a total of 4,210,000 tickets. On Rotten Tomatoes, Ebirah Horror of the Deep has a 57% with an average rating of 5.1 out of 10.
And
that's
a little generous.
Yeah, I kind of thought so too compared to some of the other ones. And I thought the Rotten Tomatoes score was kind of high too, because I believe the audience score for this one is considerably lower than the 57%. But I also might be thinking of Son of Godzilla because I was doing a little double research. So,
Yeah,
Godzilla is on screen for 13 minutes and 1 second of the film, or 15%. His first little teaser of him sleeping is at 30 minutes and 51 seconds, or 36% of the way through the film. And he fully wakes up and we see him at 52 minutes and 40 seconds, or 60% of the way through the film.
Yeah, that's definitely one that watching it, like, I felt it, you know, when it's a half hour in and you just see Sleeping Godzilla and then you're into the back 25 minutes of the movie or 30 minutes of the movie before he's waking up. It's like, yeah, 13 minutes of screen time all crammed into that last half hour of the movie, essentially. It's definitely one of those, one of the Godzilla movies that's very structured, kind of heavy on the back end, saving a lot, basically all of the Godzilla stuff for as late as possible in the movie.
Yeah, when I watched it, I seen him, 30 minutes into the film, and I was like, I don't remember seeing Godzilla this early on in the film, and then
another, another 25
30
minutes goes by.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that was my line of thinking too, because as a kid, I say things like, I watched this a lot as a kid, but honestly, I think it's more that I watched the last half hour of it a lot as a kid. I feel like as a kid, I was probably really jumping to the moment where they wake Godzilla up and just watching the end of the movie a lot.
Oh, for sure. Cause, that first, as a kid, the Red Bamboo, or we don't care about that. But as you get older, it's not the greatest storyline, but it's enough to keep your attention for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, for my kind of overall thoughts on this, this is the first of what some fans call the Island trilogy, where it would be this movie, Son of Godzilla, and All Monsters Attack / Godzilla's Revenge, where the action takes place almost entirely on an island. The first two are directed by Jun Fukuda, and this is sort of the kind of prototype entry. It's the first one that doesn't really have a main plot taking on mainline Japan. No monsters attacking cities. Godzilla attacks a base at one point, but it's really scaled down in terms of the monster spectacle. Mothra is no longer a larva here. Mothra is an adult again. The twin fairies are kind of a switch up. They're not the Peanuts twins. They're not the singing duo of the Peanuts. It's a new set of actresses, and they're not singing the typical Mothra song. They're singing kind of a newer off-brand Mothra song. Like, everything about this movie is just kind of unique in that it feels sort of like an off-kilter alt version of the franchise, and it's kind of a first draft of because I think as this director Jun Fukuda, this composer Masaru Sato, like, this I think is probably one of their weaker efforts, but as they continue on and do more Godzilla collaborations, I think they hone in their style and their abilities, and they eventually get to one of my favorite movies of the Showa era. So it's interesting to see that they kind of start off a little rough, but improve later.
Yeah, and once Godzilla comes on screen and officially wakes up, I have a blast with the rest of the movie where, he's fighting Ebirah and he's destroying, like you said, the Red Bamboo's base, I guess you can call it. That to me is a blast. I have a lot of fun with that. Is this one of my favorites? I mean, no. Do I have fun watching it, or can I still enjoy it? Absolutely. As we've said before, we're Godzilla fans, so we enjoy all of these movies. We just like some more than others.
Yeah, definitely. The last third of it, the final act, is a lot of fun. It's got some really good monster fights. It's a little bit of a chore to get there, but it's an interesting set of human characters. It's kind of a little, it's a little bit of a wonky plot line with these dual islands and weather balloons or whatever carrying people from one island to the other, and it's an interesting wonky kind of cast of characters. You've got a thief in there that stole a boat. They sneak onto the boat and hijack it and take it to this island. Like, it's kind of like a goofy plot line, but to set the stage for what comes, it gets the job done, and you end up with some really good monster stuff in the back third of the movie.
Absolutely. And with you bringing up the thief in the film, I will go into my favorite character, and that was him. I believe his name was Yoshimura.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. No, I was going to say, I'm in agreement there. He's my favorite character as well. I'll let you go, though.
I don't know why. I mean, it wasn't very much to pick from in this film. A lot of bland, kind of just basic characters. They were there for a paycheck. They weren't there to stand out, I guess I would say. But him he robbed a bank, he's trying to get away, and he just wants to be left alone with his money, and then these guys come aboard and they end up sailing out to sea, and they get all of his money wet and ruin it, so he's just having a bad day. But he was just my favorite character. He was the one I picked, not for no specific reason. He was just the one that stood out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got Akira Takarada playing him, which doesn't hurt. He's the star of a lot of these movies, so it's always fun to see him on screen. it's a different character. Yeah, it's a different character than he usually plays. This is, not that he's a very negative or bad or more morally complex character, but he's a thief, which typically Takarada's playing more overtly heroic roles in these movies. So he's a thief, and I could throw out, we'll get onto it, but I love the entire way that he's kind of playing. Are you a thief? Aren't you? Why, how can you pick locks? This and that. Like, he's trying to hide the fact that he's a thief without hiding the fact that he's a thief. I just like that whole dynamic that he has going.
Yeah, what's in this briefcase? Why can't we get it open? It gives me a chuckle when they have that little interaction in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're in agreement on that one, do you have a favorite soundtrack or score from the film?
I could, like I said, as much as this composer goes on to do some really good stuff in later movies, I do not love the score of this movie, and I don't have a specific track name, but the kind of main that's the best impression I can do of it, that comes back, this sort of surfer style monster theme. Like, that's the one that always sticks in my head whenever I'm watching the movie. That's the one that always comes back to my mind, because unfortunately a lot of it's a little forgettable.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're in cahoots on that one too. So I agree with you. I just marked it as the main title.
Okay,
it reminds me, if you listen to it, of Surfing Bird off of Family Guy. I don't know why that's what it makes me think of, but that's where I go to.
No, a little bit, maybe a little bit of one of the main tracks that was in Pulp Fiction. It's kind of got that same kind of a vibe. So it's interesting. Yeah,
it's not, like you said, this composer, he goes on to do much better things than this. But I mean, for what the film is, I can appreciate the soundtrack that it comes along with it.
Mm-hmm. And coincidentally, he was also the composer of Godzilla Raids Again. And I will say that I think he's made an improvement on his work of Godzilla Raids Again, and he continues to improve his musical scores as he goes on to do more Godzilla films.
For sure. And it's great to see how do I want to say, like, how his music or his scores advance over time, how they get better, like you said. It's but sadly none of his scores are over great films, but I do like a couple of the ones down the road that I have a feeling that we're going to differ on, that he's the composer of.
I even take umbrage with what you just said. He happens to score one of the most peak Showa Godzilla movies ever, and we will talk about it one day.
Can't wait for that. But until then, I'll go into a quote that I found in this film, which, again, I had trouble finding a quote from this film. There's a couple films so far that I found one that I truly liked the quote, and there have been a couple, including this one, to where I've had to dig a little, like, okay, like that's not too bad. And it could be Mothra's asleep at present. Our prayers will reach its source and it will arrive. Yes, I'm sure Mothra is soon going to hear us. And I don't know why that kind of called out to me. I know it's just they were hoping like Mothra was going to come help them, so I guess that's why that kind of reached out to me. Kind of a bland quote. This is one of those movies where it's hard to find a knockout quote that really moves you or means something to the film.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't lobby any criticisms towards you at the quote you picked, because this is one where I kind of have to. There's dialogue that I like in general, which is basically any time that Akira Takarada's character is making quips about his lock picking and thievery and safe cracking and his sort of suspicious activities. Anytime he's bantering about that, I love that. I don't have a specific line. I have to call a mulligan on any kind of one standout line of dialogue, because I just didn't really have one. It would kind of just be picking one to pick one if I were to do so.
Yeah, this is I almost did the same thing, and I almost threw in the towel on this one. But you get a free pass, but since I kind of made up the thing of, we got to pick a favorite quote, I was like, all right, I'm going to stick to it. If Chris can't find one, I'll give him a free pass, because it was my idea for a quote, knowing how hard it was going to be in some of these films. So I'll give you a free mulligan on some of these ones in the show. Once we get to like Heisei and Millennium, I think it's more close. It's closer to our time, 80s, 90s. So it'll be a little easier to get a quote that we appreciate.
Definitely. There's great lines, and I'll be pulling. There'll be certain films where I say like, hey, I watched the dub and I'm pulling a dub line and I have no idea if it's in the sub version or not. For sure. There'll be moments of that. But yeah, this one, I mean, just things like there's the bit where he's cracking the safe or the door, and the guy's like, oh, lock picking must be hard, and he's like, well, it's only hard if you're an amateur, something like that. It's like lines like that are fun. If I have to pick something specific, it would be a joke line like that, but it's kind of tough to hinge on any other line in this one.
I agree. And before I go on to what my favorite scene was, I'm sure we're somewhat in agreement here that my favorite part of the film is the fight scenes with Ebirah and Godzilla. No specific, probably, I mean, when they're throwing the rock back and forth and Ebirah's hitting it, Godzilla's catching it and throwing it back. That's such a child, like, so set up for kids, and you can tell that's made for a child's movie, a kid's movie, but it's still adult fun.
100%. And yes, the generic answer is any of the monster fights. I guess I'll highlight kind of 3 monster action moments, like very specific moments that I genuinely love. The first one is when the jets are attacking Godzilla. There's this really great shot, like a close-up shot of a jet flying kind of by Godzilla's hip or thigh, and it flies by and it hits Godzilla's tail, and the camera kind of moves with the jet, like zooms as it's doing it, and it's just like a really dynamic shot for a mid-60s Godzilla movie, where usually these things are kind of played out in like wide shots or medium shots or specific close-ups. So it's just like this really cool kind of dynamic close-up shot of this jet flying in and hitting Godzilla's tail. I like that moment. Moment number 2 is when they're playing back and forth with the rock. When Godzilla's kind of fed up with it, he hits the rock to the side, and you just have this it's kind of like a comedic smash cut to this tower that's just minding its own business off on the island, that just gets railed by the rock. And it always makes me laugh when I see it, because it's like it's like Godzilla hits the rock away, and then you're just cutting to the random building that just gets leveled by that rock out of nowhere. And I always laugh when I see that. And then, and the ultimate boss moment is when Godzilla rips Ebirah's claw off and is taunting him by clasping it over and over again at him, like he's taunting him with his own claw. Those 3 monster moments in this movie are just like peak.
I couldn't agree with you more. Anytime Godzilla's fighting jets, I love it. I love, there's certain camera angles of the jets coming in certain movies and flying around him. Or like you said in this one, where it runs into his tail. And then him ripping Ebirah's claw off and taunting him with it, that one slipped my mind. So I'm super glad you said that, because as you were saying it, I was kind of playing it back in my head. And that's again, that's something that can make you laugh as a 5-year-old or a 35-year-old, you know. A giant monster is taunting each other like kids on the playground.
Yeah, it's got so much attitude because it's like, you know, it's not like he took Ebirah's like sword away, you know, it's like he ripped Ebirah's claw off and is clapping it at him like what an absolute like baller move, you know, like I ripped your arm off and now I'm taunting you with it. Like it's so cold of a moment, you know, it's just hard not to enjoy that.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, if you don't enjoy that, you probably don't have a sense of humor. Or you hate these movies.
Yeah, what are you here for? You know, what are you here for if you don't get a little bit of fun out of that?
Yeah, and you know that, you know, watching the Godzilla movies, that probably the last, after Godzilla vs. Mothra, or Mothra vs. Godzilla, that these films get kind of more kiddish. Ghidorah is still kind of somewhat serious, but with the princess and the alien and all that. And then Monster Zero, like this is probably the film where it really starts to get for the kids, you know, like you said, the taunting, and then we go into Son of Godzilla, which, you know, is that's on a whole nother level, which we'll get to another time.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a scale, you know, a lot of people like to try and draw a hard line and be like, this is the one where it went, or this is the one. It's like, but it's peppered throughout, you know, you get Godzilla kind of being a reluctant ally in Ghidorah, and then he's hopping up and doing a dance move in Invasion of Astro Monster, and here he's sort of taunting his enemy. I mean, then they make him a freaking dad, you know, so it's like, it's definitely a sliding scale, and it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, before you know it, we're at, you know, Godzilla flying and doing sliding tail drop kicks and things like that, and it just kind of feels like it happened slowly and then happened all at once, you know?
For sure. And I mean, if you're not a fan of the series, you're not going to appreciate it. But somebody like you and me, we can rewatch these movies repetitively and still get a kick out of it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Before I go into monster design for this film, I'll give you some of these fun facts, or facts that I thought you might find interesting.
Sure.
So, director Jun Fukuda selected Masaru Sato to score his films to give it what he said was a different touch from Ishiro Honda's, noting Sato's music was lighter than Akira Ifukube's, and producer Tomoyuki Tanaka didn't agree with this decision, but Fukuda went out in the end and ended up having Sato score this film.
That's interesting. It's definitely a bit of a bold take. The lighthearted nature, like this is definitely much more of a sort of fun, sort of Scooby-Doo gang kind of island adventure movie. So, you know, it's hard to imagine like the darkness and seriousness of Akira Ifukube scoring this film. So, you know, Fukuda knew the kind of movie he was maybe going to make. He knew kind of what the script was like. So, you know, maybe I think generally his instincts to go with a different composer, you know, even if it didn't result in this being the greatest Godzilla musical score ever, I think his instincts were right for the tone of the film he was making.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I miss the Godzilla March, or like that could have been in all of these films at least once, just as a little callback, and I would not have been upset.
Mm-hmm.
But the underwater sequences were filmed on an indoor soundstage where the Godzilla and Ebirah suits were filmed through the glass of a water-filled aquarium. And then some of the scenes with the Godzilla suit were also shot separately underwater as well.
That's very interesting. I'm surprised that I forgot to mention the underwater stuff. The original Godzilla movie has the finale where Godzilla is seen underwater, but since then, as far as my best memory goes, this is the first one we're actually seeing some real action of Godzilla fully submerged underwater when Ebirah drags him down. And it's sort of a bit of a an early entry in a long line of kind of token underwater Godzilla scenes that you eventually see throughout some of the later films where, you know, you get to the Millennium series and it feels like almost every Millennium movie had your kind of token Godzilla completely underwater and CGI animated shots. I feel like almost every Millennium movie does that. So it's just interesting to see, you know, the sort of the genesis of taking a peek at Godzilla under the water and things like that. It's interesting to see where that comes from in the franchise.
Yeah, and it's also, I find it interesting. I like looking stuff up like this. I've always been a special features kind of guy, like, or even when I was a kid, I used to buy, you know, movies, whether it be Halloween, Friday the 13th, Terminator, you know, anything, or even like Rush Hour, Rambo. And I would watch the movie, and at some point I would go back and watch the special features on how kills were done or how the makeup for Terminator or something was made. I always liked and got into special features. I wanted to get into film when I was younger, and as I got older, I realized that wasn't an option. So I've always been kind of a film nerd with special features and how stuff is done. So knowing that they filmed it through the glass of a water-filled aquarium, I mean, that's kind of cool. I mean, you wouldn't know that that's how they did that.
Yeah, it's an interesting, you know, you watch it and you can kind of maybe tell that it's kind of being shot like dry for wet, you know, like you can see that like it's not really submerged, but it is interesting to learn like what are the creative solutions in the age of no computer effects, what some of the creative solutions were to get the results, and it's like that's such an inventive thing to film it through an aquarium lens kind of. So yeah, we're in the same generation. I grew up as a special features junkie as well. Audio commentaries, making of documentaries, you know, the Star Wars prequels, the Lord of the Rings DVDs, that stuff was just candy for me as a kid. So we're very much coming from the same perspective there.
Yeah, for sure. I got one more fun fact for you. I kind of found this one funny, and excuse me, but Jun Fukuda was not fond of the Americanized adaptation of Ebirah Horror of the Deep. In an interview, he was quoted saying, "Toho sent me a copy of the VHS tape edition of Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster when it was released." And he was quoted saying, "It was like opening up an old wound. I didn't watch the tape."
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think from what I've sort of heard and seen from him in other areas, I believe that even he was not, as he aged, that he was not terribly fond of many of the Godzilla movies that he made. I think he kind of had a look of it as he was making the sort of the B tier, the lower grade Godzilla movies, and that they didn't match up to some of what Honda and others were doing. So because I've heard a little bit about this in an audio commentary for Godzilla vs. Megalon, where he apparently was a little bit down and self-deprecating when it came to his own Godzilla film. So it's I don't know if that's necessarily like a big mark against the American version of the movie, because the American version doesn't really have very many differences in edits. I think for him, it's just that generally speaking, he just might not love his work that he did on this movie, which is a shame.
Yeah, because, I mean, you got to direct multiple movies, and out of the ones he directed, I feel like this is one of his lower quality ones. The other ones he directed, I would say I would probably like more, but I guess when we get to I guess you can call it a tier rating of the films out of the 15, the 10 we're going to keep, we'll see where this one falls.
Agreed. I this one's a little bit on a cusp. You know, I don't know if we want to talk about it here. I think I might. I mean, we can get into at the end. We always do a little bit of like where our rankings are standing at that point. So we'll save it for then at the end of this episode.
Okay, so with that being said, we'll go into monster design, which. I mean, I can start with Mothra, and there's not a whole lot to say about her. She just looks older. She's an adult now, looks older. her coloring in this to me is kind of bland. It looks a little faded. But I won't go on too much with Mothra.
Yeah, Mothra's definitely a little old and dusty. It definitely looks like they just kind of dragged out whatever prop or marionette or puppet that they had and kind of just used it. Definitely old, musty, faded, which is weird to go from like larva to like chronologically, if you were to say that this movie it takes place earlier and that this movie somehow takes place before Mothra versus Godzilla and that it's that original Mothra. Like if you were to say that, it'd be believable because this Mothra seems kind of old and dirty. But it's interesting to note that Godzilla and Mothra kind of have a little bit of a mini fight, a little mini tuffle in this movie, and that's one of those artifacts from the King Kong version of the script, because King Kong and Mothra had no history, they had no connection, and so this, King Kong wouldn't be an ally of Mothra in the way that Godzilla has sort of become an ally of Mothra. But you could also make the argument that Godzilla became an ally of the larva Mothra, so maybe when that larva becomes a moth again, it sort of digs up old wounds. No one's going to fault them for character consistency with these giant monsters, but it's interesting.
Yeah, we don't truly get to some consistency until we pretty much get to the Heisei era, which is the one thing I love about it is it's pretty consistent. But the Showa era, we kind of just bounce all around like we're in a trampoline park.
Yeah, it's a loose continuity for sure, because let's just imagine if this was a King Kong movie, if everything about it was the same, but it was just King Kong instead of Godzilla, it would be a King Kong movie where you have Mothra fairies, but not the same actresses as the three other movies, and then it would be a Mothra that was randomly an old moth again and not the larva. So it kind of feeds into that kind of, it feels a little off-brand. It feels a little like an alt version, like this would have been a King Kong movie with his own version of the twins, his own version of the Mothra song, his own version of Mothra almost. It would have been interesting that if it had stayed a King Kong movie, it probably wouldn't be perceived as being within the continuity of the Godzilla Showa era,
Well, Toho, if you're listening, make it happen. We got two people here that want it. That's more than enough.
yeah. Make it an animated movie or something. I don't know.
Yeah, give us something with King Kong and Mothra.
Do the George Lucas replacing every shot of Godzilla with King Kong.
Yeah, maybe in the Netflix anime, Mothra will make a trip to Skull Island.
Yeah, who knows?
All right. What did you think of Ebirah?
Actually, not the greatest, most inventive creature design, and certainly after getting a character like King Ghidorah as an adversary, Ebirah is a little uninspired. And again, coming from the perspective of it being conceived as a King Kong movie, you can imagine, a rather animal-based, earthy-based, not really cosmic, powerful, wild monster for King Kong to fight. A giant lobster shrimp hybrid creature, and it's a nice change of pace to just get a more, it's a giant creature as opposed to a kind of space monster with laser bolts and things like that. So it's a nice scale down, and the water element gives Ebirah a little bit of an advantage over Godzilla in some regards, even though Godzilla's kind of aquatic as well. But it's an interesting change of pace, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, Godzilla whooping on this thing is a little bit of a formality. But it's a cool design. I have always liked the look of it. I always thought it looked so lively when I was a kid.
I like what you said about Kong fighting more of like an animal and not having some super-powered monster to fight, because he, in King Kong vs. Godzilla, he fought the octopus. In the original Kong, he was fighting T-Rex, and then he fought, a snake in his little home, his little cave. And in the 76 film, he fights another snake, and it's always an animal. So I guess, like you said, a lobster shrimp combination, you wouldn't think it would be too tough of a challenge for a giant ape or gorilla.
Yeah, and another interesting thing is that the reason that Godzilla doesn't really fire his breath off too many times in this movie is because that's one of those artifacts from the King Kong script is King Kong wouldn't have had any breath attacks, so they don't have Godzilla shoot his breath very much in this one, because a lot of the fights, like the sort of soccer ball game with the rock throwing it back and forth, like that's a sequence clearly sort of designed from the ground up to be for King Kong, not for Godzilla.
Well, yeah, and then if he fires his atomic breath too much, who's going to eat all that lobster?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's fun because when he finally unleashes it on Ebirah, he cooks it pretty quick and thoroughly.
Oh yeah, that atomic breath does him in very quickly, and it's a great little scene. Like I said, I have fun with the fight scenes in this. But let's move on to the big G, what we thought about him in this one. I'm not the biggest fan of this look. His look over the next couple movies, I'm not the biggest fan of, but I can appreciate that they made him look more kid friendly. He's got the bigger eyes, and I feel like his face is a little more smushed in. He just he doesn't look like a mean, badass radioactive monster anymore. He looks like something you'd almost see on a cartoon, a kid-friendly monster.
Yeah, they definitely, between sort of just aesthetically, without looking at a lot of side-by-side pictures, it feels like his neck gets a little longer. It feels like his head gets a little more frog-shaped, where the placement of his eyes is, or the placement of his eyes are. And so it gives him his profile and his silhouette becomes, a little cartoony in proportion, and certainly a little friendlier, a little sort of Sentai monster, sort of Ultraman style kind of, feels like a guy in a suit a little more, but, it's iconic in its own way, but not the direction I would go with for a Godzilla design.
Yeah, for sure. And we've said probably in almost every episode before this that the Godzilla suit is constantly changing, and sometimes it's for the better and other times not so much. But if it's for the kids, you can appreciate it. These movies are something, if you want to get one of your kids involved in Godzilla, this is something you'd want to show them. Yeah,
for sure. This is definitely one that's easier for the youngsters to watch. Maybe if maybe you fast forward a little bit through some of the early parts, but it gets there and it has fun. It's easier for kids to understand. It's not a complex plot with a lot of military and evacuations and strategies and things like that. Like, it's very much a sort of stranded on an island type of movie, and the island just happens to have Godzilla and Ebirah on it, and Godzilla's evolved to kind of have a more island-based lifestyle. He's always changing his appearance to kind of match his surroundings, apparently. So he's in kind of froghead mode for this island.
Yeah, for sure. So we're kind of in agreement on the suit. It's not the greatest, but I guess you could say it could have been worse, but then also could have been a lot better.
Yeah, and you wonder, could you imagine an exact replica of the 54 or the King Kong versus Godzilla doing these scenes in this setting? It's like maybe, but it's like, would that have maybe not come across as well? It's hard to, I don't know, it's hard to picture.
Yeah, for sure. That would be almost like putting this Godzilla into the 54 version, just completely swap them, and then the 54 version almost turns into a kid movie as well.
Yeah, it'd be hard to imagine like this thing with its long neck and the head kind of bobbling and the eyes all big going through like a burned and destroyed Tokyo as the innocent families are being killed. Like it's like it becomes sort of it maybe becomes, you know, darker and crazier in a sort of weird, bizarre way, you know, but it's hard to imagine that.
I agree. That's a film I don't want to see.
Yeah, you know, it would maybe be too scary to see this weird, goofy Godzilla just slaughtering masses.
Well, with that, with the end of our monster design, let's go into our tier rating, or our keep 10, get rid of 5, which currently is actually keep 7. But what would be your rankings for these 7 films? Where would you place them so far?
All right, let me kind of pull this up here. And again, you know, always kind of subject to change. And this might be a hot take, but I kind of would put, if we're going to start best or start worst, where do you want to start?
Start worst. Go worst to best.
Okay. Maybe a hot take. I think I would put this one at the bottom, just below Raids Again. Now maybe that can kind of interchange, but I think I'd put this one at the bottom, and then Raids Again in number 6 spot. Astro Monster number 5, Ghidorah number 4, King Kong vs. Godzilla number 3. Godzilla number 2, Mothra versus Godzilla number 1. You know, this stuff's always changing a little bit, but that's my general vibe of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and I mean, rankings are hard. You know, I've tried to rank all 36 films multiple times, and it's like every 6 months I'll go back over the last like 2 years or so and look and be like, no, now I like this one a little more than that one. So like, yeah, I feel like we're never going to get a solid list that's not going to change of at least 36 films. Now, if you were ranking something like the Halloweens or Nightmare on Elm Street, where there's only like 9 or 10, or, you know, then it's a little bit easier to say, okay, this is my definitive favorite. You know, these ones are clearly the bottom of the barrel, and then these ones are kind of interchangeable in the middle. But with this franchise, you can have 20 or 25 movies that are all interchangeable in the middle, and then a couple favorite and a couple that you're like, yeah, I don't ever want to watch these again.
Yeah, once you're dealing with 40 movies, it's kind of hard to make the case of like, oh, this one deserves spot 25, not spot 27. You know, it just becomes it becomes almost an exercise in futility, where, you know, I'm completely game for doing the full series ranking, but I'd also love to maybe break it down by era of just the Showa films, just the Heisei films, just the Millennium films. Because once you start to get to 40, it kind of gives an impression that, oh, well, everything in the bottom 10 you just like don't like or hate. It's like, well, some of these movies are at the bottom by default because, you know, some of these other ones I just like more. You know, it's not like a mark against it. So it's fun to break them up sometimes, but I'd have to put this one at the bottom so far of the first 7.
Okay, yeah. And I do want to do, you know, the 15 Showa and then the Heisei, the Millennium all separate. And then once we kind of take our time and are all the way through the movies, get an episode where we just take our time and go through all 36 or 37 and 38 if the new Toho and the new Godzilla and Kong film are out, and just rank all 38 in an episode and see how different our lists are. But we might have to give some time to think on that one.
Absolutely. Did I miss it, or did you not give your 7 rankings?
I have not yet. I will go into that right now. So at the bottom of the barrel, I think I'm going Godzilla Raids Again. And then I think, this is going to be controversial, but then I'm going Ghidorah, the 3-headed monster.
Oh.
Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. I put this one above those two just for the childish and kiddish fight scenes with them hitting the rock back and forth. And then, like, you brought up the great point of him tearing his claw off and mocking him and taunting him with it. And that's just great. I can't, in all good faith in my mind, put it below those two for those reasons.
All right, fair enough. I mean, your opinion.
Yeah, with this one at 5, I would probably go King Kong vs. Godzilla at 4. I'm struggling here. I don't want to be too controversial. No. Probably Invasion of Astro Monster at 3, the 1954 at 2, and then Mothra vs. Godzilla at 1, which I think that might have changed from last episode. I think last episode I had Invasion of Astro Monster at 2. But like I said, there's a couple of these films. I'll get a definitive ranking at the end once we watch all these, and I'll stick to that.
Yeah, it's tough. And even when you come up with a ranking that the next month, for me, I kind of, and maybe I shouldn't, but I kind of sometimes bring in like a macro approach to how I view the movies. I kind of view them as how they kind of fit into the series. And so, like, tie breaking between Raids Again and Ebirah as the bottom, it's like if Ebirah disappeared, it doesn't really like conflict or disrupt anything with the franchise. It's like Raids Again really just kind of gets those bonus points because it kind of occupies a space in the series that is required, to go from the one Godzilla that's killed to then the other Godzilla trapped in ice that becomes the Godzilla for the rest of the series. It's like, so Raids Again, like, maybe it's an unfair way to judge it, but it's like, well, Raids Again isn't great, but it's a more necessary movie in the series than something like Ebirah, which, is a one-off kind of adventure. It's like it could not happen. You could skip over it and you're not losing anything. That's why it's probably, for me, my first, like, definitive, I think I would skip this one. I think I would leave it if I could only save 10 of these movies.
Yeah, and like you said, Raids Again, it's almost part of like an original trilogy with 54 Raids Again and then King Kong vs. Godzilla. But I mean, even at being at number 5, this film might not be safe. And, Raids Again might end up being safe at the end. So, it's just, it all comes down to those final 15. You're looking at them and you're like, all right, I got to choose 10. What one am I taking to a deserted island with me to watch for the rest of my life?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting to think about that. Yeah, I'll show a little bit of my hand, my own sanity and my own OCD nature. Like, the ones that are integral to the progression of the series, that are kind of like required reading, they will get favoritism from me, because I can't imagine a world where I take out something that's important to the evolution of like the plot of the franchise. So there's some of them that will get an unfair kind of favoritism for me just for things like that.
I have no problem with that at all. I like that you're doing it that way, because then it gives us a different scenario with me doing it as in how I enjoy them. You're doing it off of how important they are to the actual series. So, yeah, 2 different views.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we can, like, that original movie's just got to go,
Yep. 54, see you later. You're the least important. You are the weakest link.
Yeah, 54 confirmed trash. Why was it ever made?
We're going to get hate mail for that because people aren't going to understand our sarcasm.
Even being sarcastic, they'll take that clip and that clip will destroy us.
All over YouTube and Twitter and everywhere else. Right in our Godzilla fan club.
Exactly. These guys don't know what they're talking about. They're talking trash on the original.
All right, to continue, that's all I have for you on Ebirah Horror of the Deep in this one.
Yeah, likewise, maybe maybe would have been best left as a King Kong movie, but, that's not the road we traveled down. It's a fun Godzilla movie in and of itself, and, happy to have it in the series.
Absolutely. And like we said, Toho, make it happen. Everyone remakes everything eventually, so bring on, King Kong versus Ebirah.
Yeah, do it.
But all right, so this was the first of 2 Godzilla films which were back-to-back on a Pacific island as the primary setting, rather than a location inside of Japan. And the second and final one in the 2 is Son of Godzilla, which we will be looking at next week. So if you have nothing, I got nothing. I will thank you for joining me again. Thank our listeners, and until next time.